Welcome back to the Cyber Resilience Brief, a Safe Breach podcast. I'm your host, Tova Dvorin, and with me is our co host and offensive cybersecurity engineer, Adrian Culley. This week, we're continuing our special November focus on critical infrastructure security and resilience. Adrian, we established that CI is interconnected, creating a dangerous domino effect when an attack hits one weak link.
That's the grim reality, Tova. CISA emphasizes the need to know your infrastructure and dependencies. It's not just about securing your four walls, it's about recognizing that your water treatment facility relies on a managed cloud service provider, which relies on a software vendor, which relies on a utility for power.
And the SolarWinds attack and the MOVEit vulnerability showed us how an attacker can hit dozens of CI companies simultaneously by compromising one upstream vendor. The risk, therefore, is shared. Adrian, could you tell us a little bit about the SolarWinds attack and about the MOVEit vulnerability for those who might not be aware?
Absolutely. They're similar to also to the Log4j attack. These are referred to as supply chain attacks for all of the reasons we've both just mentioned. The SolarWinds attack, often attributed to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, as the Russians say, SVER, and in the West, SVR, was a highly sophisticated espionage campaign. The attackers infiltrated SolarWinds' software development process and inserted malicious code known as Sunburst into legitimate updates for the Orion platform, a network and systems monitoring product used by approximately 300,000 organizations worldwide. This is a classic Trojan horse or software supply chain attack. The MOVEit attack, conducted by the Russian speaking cybercrime group Klop, also affiliated with the intelligence services, exploited a zero-day vulnerability, a flaw unknown to the vendor and users. In Progress Software's MOVEit transfer, managed file transfer, MFT software, the attackers leveraged a critical SQL injection vulnerability to access and steal data from the underlying databases of organizations using the MFT tool. This shared risk, when we're talking about supply chain attacks, requires equally a shared or at least highly informed validation strategy. Generic testing won't cut it. We must use Adversary Exposure Validation, AEV, to model the specific techniques that adversaries use to exploit these supply chain and dependency links.
Thank you for that explanation, Adrian. So, AEV, which we defined last month as focusing on active relevant threats, needs to be hyper tuned for third party risk in the CI context.
It needs to model threats like 1. Attacks originating from a compromised managed service provider's VPN access. 2. Attacks exploiting vulnerabilities in a common software component like Log4j used across the supply chain. And 3. Attacks targeting data exfiltration points that impact multiple critical infrastructure partners.
How does AEV practically model an attack that starts with a compromised vendor?
It starts with intelligence, Tova. AEV platforms ingest threat feeds that specify the TTPs used by groups like
Burp,
those targeting
burp,
financial institutions or utilities.
burp, burp.
Crucially, it looks at TTPs for initial access via supply chain vectors. The platform simulates the lateral movement and communication patterns of that specific threat actor from the presumed entry point, a vendor jump box, a shared cloud portal, or a compromised API endpoint. The simulation tests if the receiving CI organization security controls, zero trust enforcement, EDR, network segmentation, would detect and block the simulated attack traffic originating from that trusted but compromised source.
Okay, so to use and reuse an overuse our burglar alarm analogy, you're not just testing the front door, you're testing the service entrance that you share with your third party neighbors.
Exactly. AV allows a CI organization to ask, if our core human resources SaaS provider was breached, would their access tokens, when used by a threat actor, let them into our mission critical environment? It validates the efficacy of those crucial micro segmentation and least privilege controls against real world third party threat behaviors.
Okay, Adrian, could you give us a concrete example of a critical infrastructure AEV scenario that differs from general enterprise testing?
Certainly. In the finance sector, AEV would prioritize simulations of techniques used for credit card skimming or SWIFT network fraud. In healthcare, it would focus on ransomware propagation aimed at locking electronic health records or data exfiltration of PII and PHI information. But the most unique is the ITOT dependency. An AV scenario for energy might simulate a phishing-based initial access on the corporate IT network, followed by the threat actor attempting to use a remote access tool like TeamViewer to jump across the DMZ into the OT environment. The AV simulation specifically validates the security roles and monitoring at that critical IT-OT boundary.
So let's talk a little bit about that IT/OT boundary and some of the gaps between them. First of all, it's worth mentioning that that boundary is huge. The boundary between IT and OT is where the corporate risk meets the physical risk, and a gap there is catastrophic. That's what leads to these major infrastructure breakdowns that hurt hundreds and thousands of people. But beyond that, it's worth mentioning that when we talk about IT, we're talking about systems that have undergone the digital transformation, at least partially. When we talk about OT, a staggering number of those systems are not only bespoke code, but they're carrying the technical debt from essentially being programs that are older than you and I are.
Absolutely, Tova. People sometimes think of, oh, you just mean old Windows systems. Surely nobody's running on Windows 3.1 anymore, or old networking systems. Surely nobody's running on OS2. The reality is in manufacturing in particular, but it's across critical infrastructure OT, there are bespoke in-house systems that are almost as old as IT being delivered into critical infrastructure. And this complexity demands a validation strategy that is not only continuous, but can effectively bridge these two distinct worlds. This leads directly to our next topic. How can we use continuous red teaming to keep an eye on that boundary 24/7?
Right, where AAV gives us the focus on what's critical now. But in an environment that changes constantly, how do we prevent a gap from opening up the day after the AAV campaign? How do we move beyond point in time?
So that's the necessity of continuous red teaming, CART. A single configuration change in a firewall, a new patch to a common software component, or a new vendor access can invalidate results of a week-long AEV campaign. Many of our customers refer to us and use us, SafeBreach, as a digital canary in the coal mine. We had about 8 weeks ago a very large pharmaceutical critical infrastructure customer in the USA, very mature. They noticed on a midday on a Wednesday, their security posture dropped 90 points. When they looked, they didn't assume breach. They took a step back. What do we do on a Wednesday that could cause this? When they did a mini incident response investigation, they quickly associated, hang on, every Wednesday at midday is when we update our firewall configurations. Could happen to anybody. They'd fingered the firewall configuration change, and they'd allowed for those your firewall engineers, because of using continuous red teaming, the SafeBreach platform validating this. Within 1 hour of that fat fingering of the configuration, they knew about it, and within 2 hours, it was remediated. What we're seeing here, a live example is CART operationalizes the AEV findings. It takes the 10 most critical supply chain TTPs, for example, the 5 most dangerous IT and OT breach paths validated by AEV, and it runs them daily or even hourly.
Hmm.
That's
So, CART is the insurance policy that ensures the resilience demonstrated by AEV remains true across every configuration and environment change.
precisely. It's the continuous check that ensures your resilience is at a constant state. The 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 only constant is change, is the old cliche, but we're trying to avoid periodic reporting, point in time reporting. In our final 2 episodes, as we continue to explore resilience during this important month, we'll synthesize this into a strategic framework for the entire critical infrastructure organization, addressing the crucial IT and OT convergence in detail.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Adrian. Join us next time for episode 3, Bridging IT and OT, a unified red team view. And in the meantime, stay safe with SafeReach. The Cyber Resilience Brief is a SafeBreach podcast, executive produced by Tova Dvorin and Adrian Culley. Sound provided by Adobe Music. Editing done with Adobe Podcasts. Distribution and tracking provided by Podbean. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to learn more, please check us out at www.safebreach.com. SAFEBREACH.com. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.